suited Rex Diggs in Oldham. One down there a couple of times.
Really giving it everything. That boat is absolutely airborne. Well, Cavalini here. He's struggling on the outside down at the bottom of the course at the moment.
May the 2nd then, 1988. This is the start of the British powerboat racing season. This is the first round of the Formula 4 British Championship. What a sight they make as they're 15, this is going to be 15 laps then of evenly matched catamarans.
They're going to go any second now. 60 laps. What's it going to be? George Evans. The G-force is tremendous. They get stiff necks at the end of a race.
No means of controlling the boat, only the steering and obviously the throttle.
Lifts off. He's really giving it everything. That boat is absolutely airborne. Andy Elliott for the Abu Dhabi. Then Nobile's boat. A sensational drive. Colossal action. If Lucy waves it much harder, she'll fall into the water.
The drivers' meeting is over and the drivers are on the way back to the pits area now to get ready for the practice session. I've got two of the most interesting Formula 4 drivers with me this morning.
Well, good afternoon or good evening, everybody, and welcome to Mantripp Meets. It's a slightly different start to normal. We have had one or two software issues, but nevertheless, we are back. We were absent, of course, last week where we had some internet problems, and today it's been software problems. But there you go. That's technology. That's the modern day. But hey, guess what, everybody? Look who we have joining us today. It is the voice from powerboat racing from the 80s, from the 90s, from Bristol Docks, from Alton Broad, from everywhere else. He's going to tell us all about it in a moment. The one and only Robin Hurst. Robin, I am very, very pleased that after all the technical difficulties and everything else that you can join us. Good evening, Robin. How are you?
Well, I'm actually in great shape, thank you. I'm thoroughly enjoying life. I realise it was all my fault that the internet went wrong last week, because I always accept that it's going to be my fault anyway. When you were trying to organise everything and everything went wrong, it always ended up on my lap. But it's great to see you tonight, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to see you, Robin. So what we're going to talk about is powerboat racing. We're going to talk about you and your involvement and everything else that happened along the way. So I guess what better place to start than right at the beginning, because of course before you were a promoter, before you were a commentator, you were of course a race driver. So, you know, what got you involved in powerboat racing in the first place?
Well, of course, it's quite a long story, but I actually started my sporting career playing on the tennis circuit. And when I was about 32, I suppose I'd done all I could manage there, and I wanted to do something else a bit more exciting. Cars looked a bit expensive, motorbikes looked a bit dangerous, so I had to go boat racing. And actually, how we came to get involved was that we were on holiday at Lowestoft. We came to watch the boat racing on a Thursday evening, and I was smitten on it. And then, of course, I went round to meet everybody, particularly John Knights Creek, of course. Yeah. Knights was the master at helping people get started at racing and also taking quite a lot of money off them in the process. But it was a great fella, and he got me all set up, got me a boat, monohull, and I kept it at Knights Creek, and he advised me. And of course, my big disappointment really was I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed the monohull racing, and I did that, I suppose, for about 4 or 5 years, never missed a Thursday night. And of course, the issue in those days was we came up from Bury St Edmunds every Thursday afternoon, and you had to get there before 5 o'clock. Otherwise, you couldn't sign in. There was 20 was the maximum they would take for the sports boat class. And, you know, we scrambled in every Thursday. We never missed a Thursday, actually, for about 5 years.
And who were the names that you were racing against at the time? I mean, there must have been some drivers that we will remember. I'm sure Shulver must have been in the mix somewhere, or had Brian not started at that point?
I guess, well, I guess I got to know all of them very well, actually. And because my big disappointment, I was going to tell you with John Knights was the master racer. And one season I was leading the championship with one race to go in August. And John said to me, I think you need a nicer boat for tonight. Why don't you try this one? And of course, what I did, the first heat, I turned it over at the Wherry turn, scored no points. Knights was in second place. He scrambled in as the club champion, nevertheless. But it was absolutely great fun. But those, of course, were the days of Neil Gregg and Tom Percival, Bob Spalding, and all the, well, they were just a great crowd. And it was Bob Brewster, of course, did the commentating. The park was always packed, particularly July and August. And you, of course, were not around then, Jason. You came along as a little fellow a little later on. And it was, so I suppose I raced myself in the monos probably from 72 up to about 76, 77. I then thought I'd better have a go in a Formula 4. And I worked at that time, well, I was the managing director of a diving compressor company called Ingersoll Rand. And I persuaded them to sponsor me. So all the boats had Ingersoll Rand written all over them. And of course, I sold them on the fact that it was near Great Yarmouth, and Great Yarmouth was our big sales area at that time. And they were all very smitten about the fact that the Ingersoll Rand boat was flashing round Alton Broad. But of course, selling was always the thing that I was good at. Wasn't much good as a driver, actually. Although I was going
to say, how did you sort of, because later on, obviously, you transformed from the mono to the cat. So you'll tell us how difficult or how easy that transformation was. But I mean, you know, some drivers are a natural. You've just said maybe, I don't know, what are you saying? You possibly was not a natural driver, or not?
Well, I thought I was a natural, of course. I thought I was a world beater. It was only when we went away to a national that I realised I was somewhat down the tubes, but nevertheless.
So can you remember your first national then? So, and if so, where was it, and how did that go?
Well, actually, I should think it probably was at Stewartby, because Stewartby was the nearest at that time, and it was a weekend and so forth. We did go all over the country eventually. We went to Chasewater and so forth, but Stewartby, I would think, would be. I was actually a member at Stewartby eventually, as well as Alton Broad. So we used to go there on a Sunday at the weekends. And of course, then my son James started to race as a junior. And then I had a double-decker trailer built. So I had the cat on the bottom and the junior boat on the top, and we lugged that all over the place. Then, of course, we had to invest in a motorhome because so we could stay on the site, and so it went on and on and on. But those were the times, actually, when, particularly at Stewartby on a Saturday night, gathering in the club with all the various racers and so forth, you got to know them all very well and got the background to it all, and it was really enjoyable.
So when you stopped being a driver, you were telling me a little story last week of why that stopped. Something to do with was it the bank manager said, well, I'll let you tell them about what happened there, why they forced you to, well, not forced you to stop, but why you sort of possibly stopped racing.
What actually happened, Jason, was that I had invested in a Formula 3. And it was a boat that I called Leaky Clariki. I can't remember the guy who he raced it on the Thames. And of course, he must have opened up the joints a bit, because I bought it after it had finished second or third on the Thames race. Looked a real cracking boat. The first time I raced it at Alton Broad, we did the first heat. When I went out for the second heat, the boat had sunk in the pitch. ordered, and so that's why we called it Leaky Clareaky. So when I raced it, I had to get it out on the trailer between each heat. Anyway, we went to a national at Chasewater, and Derek Hissett, I remember, had a very, very quick Formula 4 that was quicker than most of the Formula 3s. And when we were practicing for the Grand Prix, I accidentally flipped the Clareaky trying to keep up with Hissett and cut him out and all the rest of it. And in doing so, I got thrown out and hit my hip. That was in the Biggles days, of course, with silk scarf and all the rest of it. We weren't strapped in. It was all just chucked out. So I hurt my hip a little bit. And I was due to buy my first factory the week after. And the bank manager, I went to see the bank manager, I think it was the Thursday or the Friday, to clinch the deal and borrow the money to buy the factory. And he naturally said, "What have you been doing? You're limping a bit." And I said, "Well, I flipped my boat at the weekend." "Oh, really?" He said, "Well, if I'm going to lend you the money to buy this factory, you're going to have to retire from racing." So that was why I thought it was more sensible to borrow the money to buy the factory and start on my career, if you like, of owning factories and developing them and so forth and so on. So that was why I retired from racing rather abruptly. And then, of course, I enjoyed the scene very much. And I had done quite a lot of commentating before that, because I'd been in the round table and I'd done local radio and I'd done all sort of charity events and that sort of thing. And I seem to remember actually that Bob was ill. He had a couple of weeks off. He may have been away on holiday or something like that. And they needed a commentator. And naturally, I thrust myself forward onto the front deck and said, "I think I could do it." And that was how it all got started.
Ah, right. So in a way, pretty much, because I was telling the viewers a few weeks ago when I done my story, and I mean, when I started, it was at Fairford, and then somehow you got to hear about it, and then so on, so on. So, but it was a similar thing for me. So I put myself forward at Fairford because there was not a lot of commentating going on, because you weren't there, and I don't really even to this day know why you. It was 1990. What was it? 1993. It was, I think, a couple of weeks after Cardiff, and I think, I don't know, you weren't there, but anyway. So I kind of went up there and forced myself upon them. So you done a similar thing at Alton Broad then, and that was that.
I guess that's right. I mean, I remember you with great pleasure standing with me on the top deck, instilling all this excitement into you. Bob, of course, was a tremendous commentator. I really enjoyed listening to him. The difference between us, however, of course, Bob had all his notes. He had a history of every driver, I think, back for about 6 or 7 years. So he could almost tell you, as they were going round, the driver's wife's name, how many children they had, how many times he'd raced, where he'd finished, and all the rest of it. I tended to do it a lot more off the top of my head. In other words, just as I saw it, and tried to make it exciting. I remember there was a 3-boat race at Alton Broad going on one day, and which I tried very hard to. I think somebody said to me after the race, it was quite exciting. I thought but I do remember you coming along, Jason, and I remember that we got on very well together. And and you, of course, then became a exciting commentator as well, particularly when you came and helped us at Cholmondeley and everything, and went round the circuit. And here you are now as the impresario, interviewing everybody to get it all going again.
Well, we're trying to. But I want to go and talk about. I mean, obviously, you've commentated all around the country. I'm not sure I think you've done some stuff abroad. I'm sure you've done bits abroad as well, but you can tell us about that. But obviously, one of the things that you done was the Cumberland Basin Turn at Bristol, and Bristol Grand Prix was Monaco of the powerboat racing world. And I mean, obviously, it must have followed on. So you must have commentated at Alton Broad, probably done a couple of nationals, and Bristol was thrown at you, no doubt.
I was lucky at Bristol, really, because I thought it was much better down at the Cumberland Basin. I thought it was much more exciting. Bob wanted to do the grandstand and interview everybody and on the top deck and so forth. But I actually enjoyed the Cumberland Basin very much, because at the start of each race, it was exciting. They all came swinging around that bend right across the course, and there was a lot of incidents down at that end. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It was a tremendous experience being involved at Bristol, because Bristol, as you say, was the absolute top. It was the big Grand Prix when there was thousands of people watching in a restricted area, and it was dangerous. And I suppose the danger made it more exciting, the anticipation of it all. And of course, drivers coming from all over the world. Bill Seabold, of course, came every year, and you've got him coming on to be interviewed shortly, I hear.
Well, that was the big secret, but
oh, sorry, I do beg your pardon. All right, sorry about that. Smack the hand. I mean, I guess that I got to know.
Yes, he is. Yeah. And of course, you got to meet up with him when we had the Bristol reunion not so long back. I mean, although I say not so long back, it was what, 5 years ago now, believe it or not. So it must have been great to not only go back to Bristol, but to go back up the course and see all the drivers that would have raced there, and you would have talked about all that time ago.
Yes, I suppose that. I suppose because you're the commentator, or one of the commentators, you actually see the whole picture. The drivers, they're only going to race one race, or maybe two races on that day, but they're only going to be doing their class, whereas the commentator does every class, and therefore you see the whole picture and the whole scene. You hear on the headphones all the things that are going wrong that you're not going to talk about, and so forth and so on. So you do get a very exciting picture, particularly at the start, and all these sort of interviews and the private talking and the team talks. You know, you're involved in all those as the commentator. You would go to all the team meetings and hear what they've got to say. And but no, it was great. I mean, I was listening to Ken McCrory last week, and or the 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? Because we actually didn't get on last week. Ken was very, very competent, very good. Andy Elliott was another one that, I mean, you can look back on all the big names, the people who led the sport, really. And Ken, of course, drove with James in the Paris 6 hours race. Andy Elliott, we went to Martinique against him. We raced in the World Cup, James did there, and finished second, I think, actually. We almost beat Elliott in Martinique, but not quite. But there you go. I was very lucky that my son got involved and turned out to be such a good driver. His problem was he always was a bit too big. He got a bit too heavy, and he was giving away too much weight, particularly in the juniors, because he always started in the scratch boat in the juniors at Alton Broad. But in the nationals, he could never quite get there because of the weight. It was the start. He lost that sort of first 100 yards. And but there you go. I remember, I can't bring them all back, the names. The names have all disappeared, but there was a lot of young fellas small boys who just had that little bit of a weight advantage. But I've got to say that the 20 years I was involved, or maybe a little bit more than that, might be 30 years, it was a great time, and I'm delighted that I was able to push it along a bit, and I enjoyed Alton Broad very much. Alton Broad was a wonderful club. There's no doubt about it. There was all the Dennis Meadows and Owen Smith and Ron Howes, of course. Ron travelled the world with us when we went all over Europe, and Ron and James had their boat business that they set up in, I can't remember where it was now, when they imported the boats from Mulgard. James used to go off to Denmark, and we had to get an old boat and paint it white. Otherwise, we had to pay import duty. So we bought the old boats, put them on the trailer. Ron touched them up, made them look respectable, and then he modified them and built them and altered them. And what a great fella he is. And I hope he's watching, actually, because he was a real stalwart of the sport. And as was Owen Smith, as was Dennis Meadows, as was all of them, really. Bob Brewster, I don't know. I mean, I imagine they're all still around, but after all, I'm approaching 100 now, and I'm thinking that maybe they're around as well. But
yeah, I think Bob's still about. Sadly, I know that we did lose Dennis, but Owen Smith is still around with us, and Derek Gissett is still about with us, and that. So I think, you know, I guess powerboat racing does keep you young, if nothing else. You know, it keeps you out of pocket, but it does keep you young. but
I can vouch for the fact it keeps you out of pocket. Yes, and but I suppose when you started to try and promote the sport and go around the country, then of course it does keep you rather more out of pocket than you otherwise would have been. But
yeah, well, I wanted to come to that in a minute, because what I want to do is just stick around a little bit on the commentary thing for a moment, because I mean, obviously my influences was obviously yourself and Bob, because they were the voices in my head at the time. And Murray Walker was an influence because I used to watch Formula One cars. So your style of commentary, which was totally different to Bob's, because I've been in the commentary box lap scoring for yourself and Bob. Bob is more laid back. You're more, and you know, you're more animated, and you're the one who's picking it up and lifting it and throwing it at people and making it sound exciting. Bob would come out with, I don't know, some of the facts and that, and but you were the one really describing the picture and giving it the energy, and your voice was going quicker than the boats half of the time, and that was brilliant. But what I want to know is, so I got my influences from you, so where did you get your influences from?
I can't remember. I don't know. I suppose I must have got it from one of the old-fashioned commentators. I just have always found life as exciting. Everything I've done, I've found is exciting, and I've enjoyed it to the full. And I guess that I mean, I find driving the car exciting along the road. Hilda always gets on at me about cutting people up and not going too quick and not too close and all that sort of thing. But I guess, no, I find life as exciting, and I can't remember actually. Maybe it was from my round table days when I used to do all the local fundraising events. Maybe it was, I did the local radio sports Olympic trials and those sort of things. They weren't tremendously exciting, and there wasn't a tremendous lot of people watching those, but of course there was a lot of people on the radio watching in those days. Now, of course, you've got about 150 channels you can listen to, whereas in those days there was probably only 3 or 4. So you had a better chance of doing it. I don't know, Jason, really. I can't tell you what made it. I just found it exciting, and I transmitted the excitement to the best of my ability.
And then, as you say, you know, you were talking about promoting the sport. Obviously, you were heavily involved anyway, because you were with James, and you were with Jerry, and you were bringing them along as drivers. I mean, obviously James done F4, Jerry done F4, and then it obviously went on to do Formula 3 and ultimately Formula 2. And then the ultimate of thing for Jerry, who's on next week, was a world champion. So, you know, so that was one thing. So being involved in the team, if that didn't keep you busy, you then decide to go and get involved in promoting. So what I want to know is what made you go down the route of promoting it? Obviously, you felt a passion there, I suppose, and you wanted to progress it and push it forward.
I suppose that must have been it. I suppose that powerboat racing in those days was, it was taking place on lakes that were out in the country somewhere. Bodymore, for example, South Ockenden, Stewartby, Carmill. They were all out of the towns, and therefore the racing was fine, but they didn't really attract the crowds, and it didn't really attract television, and it didn't really attract any sponsors. And I guess that I thought mistakenly that if I took them into the town centres and I had thousands of people watching, I would nail a big sponsor for the series. And I mean, would you believe we were the first people to get Emirates when Emirates first started in 1996, I think it was, at Home Pierpoint. We got them to sponsor the event. That was the Formula 2 World Championship round that we had there. When I say sponsor, it was a very modest sponsorship, not compared to what they do nowadays. But we got them, and then of course later on we had lots of local sponsors. I guess when we started at Milton Keynes, we had the race in the centre of Milton Keynes, where we hired that was really the issue, actually, to find the circuits that you could race at and who would have you and wasn't too expensive and would attract the crowds. But I guess Milton Keynes was probably pretty good, and of course we went there on 3 or 4 occasions, I think. I always look back on Milton Keynes because that was one of the events there was my friend Trevor Hamilton Gibbs was killed there, which was very, very sad, and it took the shine off the whole thing. But we did meet a big outfit at Milton Keynes called Regis, who have office rental schemes all over the country. And they were very keen on powerboat racing, and they really wanted to get involved. And a fortnight after Milton Keynes, we were due to go to Stockton. And the Regis told me that if I got 5,000 people watching at Stockton, we hired the university there, which was on the side of the lake. We hired the dining room. We hired all their kitchen staff. We laid on all the lunches and everything. And they were due to arrive at 1 o'clock for lunch, watch the racing at 2, and we build up to the Grand Prix at 3 o'clock or 3:30 or whatever it was. And we had a tremendous crowd. We had a parade through the town on the Friday evening to promote the event. We had a terrific day on the Saturday. We had the Thundercats and what have you filling in between the races. I mean, Fiona Pascoe, what a contributor to the sport she's been with her Thundercat racing. And she came, of course, to Cholmondeley and helped us there, and helped us as the fill-in between the heats on a lot of occasions. Anyway, so on the Sunday morning, it dawned, a lovely day, and we had arranged to hire the bank all the way along. We had it all cleared along the other side because it was actually being levelled, ready to be redeveloped. So the full length of the course was all on the top of a bank, and we had a terrific crowd, absolutely tremendous crowd there. And I thought, I'm home and dry here now, because we probably had 8,000 or 9,000 people watching. And I suppose at about 12 o'clock, we had a thunderstorm, and the thunderstorm absolutely washed everybody out, and they all went home. So by the time Regis and company arrived for lunch at 1 o'clock, we didn't have the 5,000 people. So that was the nearest I ever came to negotiating the £500,000 for a 2-year deal. But Stockton was a tremendous event, though. It was up the river in the centre of the town. And the university, of course, had a terrific balcony in front of it, platform, and so which we used as the race headquarters, where we had all the drivers' meetings and that sort of thing. And I enjoyed that immensely. I enjoyed every race we went to. I mean, we had another terrific circuit was at Southport in the middle of the summer, when we raced on the lake on the side of Southport. And Southport was almost my big breakthrough, because a radio producer was on holiday at Southport, and he listened to the commentary, came and saw me afterwards and said, we're looking for somebody, Murray Walker wants to retire, and we're looking for a commentator to take over. Would you like to attend the auditions? And you can imagine that I was quite keen, although I was a bit laid back about the whole thing. But I thought,
but deep inside, it must have been buzzing with enthusiasm.
Replace Murray Walker was anyway. In the end, there was nearly 1,000 people applied for the job, and there was 10 of us invited to Broadcasting House. We were there all day, and what we had to do was commentate. They gave us all an event to commentate on in a darkened room. I remember John Inverdale and Steve Ryder were the judges, and the producer, whose name escapes me now, and one of the other commentators of the day. Anyway, the event that I was given was the Grand National. And the Grand National, of course, is a terrific event to commentate on, because the BBC have like 5 commentators all the way around the course, the start, at Beecher's Brook, at the Canal Turn, out in the country, in the grandstand. And I described that I was going to be on a tower in the middle of the course. And Steve Ryder said to me afterwards, how you described the scene was absolutely tremendous. We all sat there and we were gobsmacked about you up on a tower, binoculars, commentating on the whole race. And I did that was the race that Mr. Frisk won, actually, on the hard ground. That got me into, we then got down 10-5. And then 5 was, we did another test commentary again. 5 was down to 3, and then there was 2 of us left to get the job. And James Allen, who was the other guy who's still doing it now today, they said to me afterwards, they said, look, we're going to give James the job simply because he's 28 and you're 52. And we think we're going to have a lot more life out of him than we are out of you. And but that was the nearest I ever came. I did a lot of the Formula One. Well, not a lot. I was invited to do a lot of Formula One abroad. I did the Thailand Grand Prix, and I did 2 others before. Who was the Italian who was the promoter for Formula One then?
San Germano,
San Germano, it was before San Germano. The previous promoter worked for Mercury, actually.
Yeah, Dave Parkinson.
David Parkinson, yes, that's the man.
Yeah.
Well, I did 2 Grand Prix with him abroad, but my business at that time was growing tremendously, and I couldn't really afford to be away for a week or so. So I sort of stood back a little bit from doing the internationals, and I still did we just promoted. Obviously, we were lucky because we had quite a big business at the time. And when we were doing all the races at Stockton, Southport, we had to have our own lorries cart the we bought all our own pontoons and all our own equipment. We carted it all there sort of 2 or 3 days beforehand and put it all up, and then packed it all up again after the race was over and took it on to the next event. And and of course I was very lucky really, and that James was always a great help to me. Jerry came into the family as my son-in-law, and he was also very helpful. As you said earlier, he went on to race in Formula 2, and when he was sponsored by Red Bull, and I was the Red Bull team manager for a year. I remember when he was racing, when we went to Paris, when he won the World Championship. I think it was very disappointing for him, really, because Red Bull at the time indicated they wanted to do Formula 1. And when he won the Formula 2 World Championship, I think that it was almost an odds-on chance he'd get the opportunity to race Formula 1. But they decided then they would go to cars, and they dropped out of boats, which was very sad, really, because at that time we did lots of their events when they have these things set up in docks. When the people slide down, we took the boat and we drove it round the dock and all that sort of thing, and generally did a bit of commentating for that and so forth and so on. So that was a great...
Because I'd never even heard of Red Bull until you come along, you know. All of a sudden there's this new fizzy drink. I didn't know what it was. It was, and then you telling it's an energy drink. So I think, oh, right, okay.
That was in the days when Red Bull really got going. It was the, I remember when we did Home Pierpoint, Red Bull had 3 or 4 young ladies dishing out free drinks. And because I was doing the commentating, every time one of these young ladies walked by, I had another can of Red Bull. And because as you know, you have too many cans, you get a bit on the high side. I think I was getting more excited than ever. I wasn't quite sure whether it was the Red Bull young ladies in their shorts and tight tops, or the Red Bull itself that got me going. But anyway, it was nevertheless, that was a big event as well. That's when Red Bull first started in powerboat racing, when we got them in, and they sponsored Home Pierpoint, one of the events we did there. And again, a big name now. I mean, if we could have kept them in powerboat racing, the problem really was that we didn't get enough people watching. You know, Red Bull wanted to have 100,000 people watching, and even at Home Pierpoint, you were lucky if you got more than 10,000.
Yeah.
Stockton, we did very well at Stockton. We did very well at Milton Keynes. Milton Keynes wasn't a big enough viewing circuit, actually. There was a lot of people at the hotel and around the thing. But I suppose Cardiff was quite good, but Cardiff was... I commentated on Cardiff when they had it in the little dock, the Formula 1.
Yeah.
And that was almost too dangerous. But then when we went to Cardiff, we went into the bay, which was a bit too big, really. Too far away from the crowd, I thought. The secret is you've got to have them. We looked at Manchester. We were going to race up and down the dock at Manchester outside BBC headquarters, but it just wasn't big enough. We did a test race in Liverpool dock, but again, that just wasn't big enough. We had juniors and monos there, and at Manchester we tried them. We went up to Glasgow. I looked in the river in Glasgow, but again it was a bit too dangerous. We looked at Newcastle, and we looked very carefully with Roger Blowers and his family. His father they were very keen. They were a lovely family involved in powerboat racing, and of course Roger was then killed at Windermere after he had the terrific event. The first round we had at Alton Broad, I remember. Yeah. And we had 22 boats, would you believe? Because we had to eliminate, I think we were allowed to run 18 from memory at Alton Broad. We had 20. And Roger was had an old boat that he got all up, and he finished second or third, and he was so pleased with himself being on the rostrum for the first time. And then unfortunately he was killed at Windermere in a club race later on in that year. But the main problem at Newcastle on the Tyne was the driftwood. The driftwood coming down the river was just colossal, and we tried very hard. We had a club race there, and we had a sort of a rope across trying to stop a net, trying to stop the driftwood, but the damage to the propellers and boats was, wasn't really a flyer. So the same on the Thames, exactly the same. We weren't involved in the Thames race, that was in Len Britnell's day. But the damage to the boats there was colossal as well. Victoria Dock was, of course, absolutely fantastic. I did that a few times and I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I worked with Len down at, I did a few races for him at Ivor and so forth. But all in all, I guess I just look back on it and think that, and then of course I became the chairman of the powerboat committee, and then of course when I was going to put all these big races on, I naturally had my RYA hat on. Yeah. And I suggested to all of them that we might be able to invite Princess Anne to come along as the patron. She never did come along, of course, but nevertheless.
But you can only try.
Yeah, but I suppose that we had so many when we ran the team, when James and Ron Howes were bringing the Mulgard boats over. We bought, I don't know, that year we probably bought about 8 boats over, and we put them all in a team. We sponsor them in. When I say we sponsor them, we help them by maintaining the boats and maintaining the engines and that sort of thing. Ron did all the repairs on the boats. So we had quite a nice, and then of course, unfortunately for us, we were negotiating with Selva to become their distributor. And my old friend Ted Jelf slipped over to Italy and secured the first Selva. And of course, the Jelf Selvas always went much faster than everybody else's. I never could quite understand why, but Ted was the master mechanic. And his 2 sons were great drivers, weren't they? But there was a lot of competition there, us against the Jelfs, and I think that Jerry beat him a few times. I remember up at when we raced on the lake just south of Glasgow, James won the race there, which was pretty colossal. He was just lucky. Well, no, he wasn't lucky. The Jelfs were all force wide, and James slipped up the inside, and they just couldn't catch him after that. But it was because he had the smooth water in front. That was one of his big events.
Because I'd actually forgotten how quick James was, because when I watched the video, I think it was from 1988, again, something that you helped and was a big part of putting together with, you managed to get TV cameras at events and the events filmed. And this was one of those videos, and James was giving Ken a good run for his money, and I'd forgotten that. I'd forgotten how quick James was back in the day of his F4 days. So
he was, as I said, his problem was he was a bit heavier than everybody else. I mean, Giggins was 3 stone lighter than James, would you believe? Yeah. And Dave Giggins beat James for the World Championship at Home Pierpoint. And it was all about weight, really. Dave was a very, very good driver. There's no question about that. And we had 2 boats. Dave Burgess built 2 boats for him. He built a long boat for Bristol and a short boat for the other circuits. And he was very unlucky, really, in that he just didn't quite ever make the world champion. He was second in the Formula 4 on 2 occasions. He was second in the juniors, and it was just one of those things, you know. It was but we all had a great time. We all thoroughly enjoyed it. I think one of the big events we went to when we were racing 2 Formula 4s, when we had the double-decker trailer, was Traub and Trauback, when we were doing and there was 25 or 30 boats there, I think. And in the end, James finished 4th and Jerry finished 2nd.
But again, it's a good course because it's a straight, well, I say straight up and down course. It slightly bends, doesn't it, from memory to the right a little bit. But yeah, so it's quite a tight course as well, isn't it? You know, it's quite a narrow course. Yeah,
that was what he was good at, actually. James was very good because his weight helped it on the rough water a bit, and the water came at Traub and Trauback, bounced off the banks a bit. You know, it made it a bit. I remember the favourite, and I can't remember who it was now. On the first straight of the first heat, he flipped the boat down at the bottom, so he was out of the way to start with. And I just can't remember who it was now. But anyway, we looking back on that, as I said, we finished 2nd and 4th. And in that race, Jerry had the short boat and the sprint prop, and James had the longer boat and the slightly. So he was wanting to make sure he got home. And it worked quite well on the rough water. So, but I look back on all these things and I'm thinking, you know, how lucky I was.
But I was thinking to say, you did have the heyday of powerboat racing. You know, in the 80s was good, and the 90s, you know, and the events. I mean, you know, you've done so well. I think you were, I don't know if luck's the right word to use. I guess not, but you know, you were lucky to have a good, strong field of Formula 2 drivers, because as you said earlier, you know, there were about 22 Formula 2 drivers. But when you look at the grid, when you look, obviously Jerry was there, but you had Mark Rolls was there, the Jelfs were there, you had Ted Walsh, who was the up-and-coming fast rocket man. You had Paul Blackburn, of course, from F1, Steve Curtin, you know, and another former F1 driver coming back to F2. Billy Owen was then coming into Formula 2 at that point, Brian Shulver, and the names keep coming on and on and on. And
it did. There was a few attractions, you'll understand. There was free entry, and there was free this and free that and free the other and so forth. I guess one of the biggest events was Rother Valley for us, because I will never forget at Rother Valley, we had 24 boats turned up. We could only run 20, and we had to have an eliminator race, would you believe, to eliminate 4 of the boats. But that was a colossal. And Paul Noon Jerry and Paul Noon were right up at the front dicing. Paul went a bit wide on the one of the turn boy I was commentating on it, lost control a bit and ran up the bank, and it was a very low bank, and he slid up the bank and stopped, and of course on Jerry went. I remember there were so many drivers that that added so much to that series that we had over those 2 years, and we you know, it was just a great time. It was very good for Formula 2 because we had something to offer the public.
Yeah.
Okay, we didn't get the big sponsor at the end, but we got a few small sponsors who just about helped with the overall costs. And of course, we had Fiona Pascoe and her Thundercats, and then we went on to Chomley after that. Yeah. Well, sorry, go on, you go.
Yeah. I was going to say that. So the Pageant of Power event, which was then kind of your little baby, then really after the big events. So you've gone from racing in at Nottingham and then we turn up. I remember the first time we went to Chomley, and I was actually racing in a hydro, and I turned up there and I looked and I thought, so I've raced model boats on bigger lakes than this, but somehow we all got round, and actually it was quite good. And I think the way how the water was, because it was quite shallow, just made the boat handle totally differently. And I think also, I don't know, it was just different. And I think because it was small, it added that little bit more excitement. And also, plus, of course, you had all of the other attractions that were there. You had an air show display thing there. There was a lot of motor cars there, from Formula One to touring cars to everything else, wasn't there? And to be a part of that as well was pretty awesome and pretty amazing, and something that I guess us as powerboat drivers wouldn't normally get to mix with.
When you think, of course, there was between 60 and 80,000 people watching as well on the whole event, and they were all. The first year we did Cholmondeley, I mean, I was only invited to join the team when Cholmondeley started because the Lord Cholmondeley was friendly with Princess Anne, and he apparently asked the RYA to recommend somebody to come on the committee with them, and they recommended me. So I guess the first year we had the same commentary box, and that was a real battle because the car commentators, they would be snatching the microphone, and then I would be snatching it and looking out of the back door because the box was between the cars and the lake. I then, when we really got down to it the next year, I said, no, I've got to have a separate commentary. We'll have a separate circuit. We'll have our own marquee, our own entertainment. We'll make a real big show of it. And that's what we did. And then, of course, the first 5 years was sponsored by Bentley. And the Bentley really were terrific. You know, we had the Friday evening, or the Saturday night was the music night, and the whole thing was when it all combined into the big show. And it was pretty sad, actually, that once Bentley had their 5 years, I did 7 years there, actually. And then we got Honda, if you remember, because you came and joined me with Honda. You were in the Honda Tower, as I remember, doing all the commentating while I was talking to Honda and that sort of thing. But then after that, and of course we had Fiona and her Thundercats filling in.
I remember you going out in a Thundercat, and I did. Yeah, and I commentated on it because they said Robin's going out in the Thundercat, and I thought, no, this is a wind up. There's no way Robin's getting in there. And then there you are. I mean, I don't know if you were driving the boat or if you were just the passenger and leaning out and doing.
No, I was the driver. I was the driver. I remember with great pleasure. We had the race on the Sunday morning was sort of invitation race for people who wanted to have a go. And there was two ladies. I can't remember who they were now. Anyway, I ran over them. I lost control of the boat, and the front of the boat sort of tipped up on the front of them. But anyway, I couldn't quite win the race, however. I remember we finished second or third or something like that. But that was great fun, actually. And the other big thing at Cholmondeley was the boat rides, because the boat rides were very, very good. We had the two big high-speed boats that were churning around the lake between each of the events. So it took a lot of organising because I was putting the race on, telling the boat rides to go out, telling the Thundercats get ready, and because we wanted to keep the action on the water all the time. And then we had the hovercraft there as well one year, and they were pretty good because they came across the bank, and so everybody could stand and watch them go by, because they came onto the land and back onto the water and onto the land and back onto the water. And that went very well. That was quite a good event. Of course, I had Jenny Jelf and I had all the help from Carmel, and I shall think of her name in a moment. And it's
Ruth Morse, possibly.
Ruth
Morse, possibly.
Yes, Ruth Morse. Of course, it was Ruth Morse. But after I think it was the third year, the RYA were involved. And it was your fault, actually, Jason, because you broke down, if you remember, and stepped out of the boat, and they realised the water was only about 2 foot deep. And
We were
Ruth
talking
and-
about this the other day, and you said a certain hydroplane driver, and I thought, I keep quiet on this because I thought that you might not have remembered who that hydroplane driver was, but obviously you did. But yes, I do remember it, and it was only, I can't remember how deep it was, but I did find the deep spot at the slipway, and yeah.
So the RAA felt that was too dangerous after that, and then after that, of course, I organised it with my own team, and so everybody came along. Everybody had a great time. It was not. We were not going to have super competitive races. We were going to have put on a show, which is what we did. And of course, we had the marquee, and we laid on the barbecues and all the rest of it, and the campers and so forth and so on. And I enjoyed that immensely, and I was very lucky in that Hilda and I got together at the start of Chomley, and she helped me a lot there. And funnily enough, I still wear my Chomley shirt around on a Saturday and Sunday now, because I had about 5 or 6 of them, and it was. But I mean, when we got Honda that year, we had Honda there. They were very good. They were very demanding. They wanted the rough course on the other side of the lake where they could run their 4-wheel drive machines round, and so we had to have it all roughed up so they could go up and leaping over hills and all that. If you remember, the first 2 or 3 years we had the army on there giving army manoeuvres. That bit, and that Lord Chomley, of course, was the Colonel-in-Chief of the Cheshire Regiment. That's how they came to be there. And Lord March was on the committee there from Goodwood, and he actually was quite keen to have boats down at Goodwood as well, but they didn't have a lake then, so it was a bit. But I actually didn't in the end go to Goodwood. I clashed with something else. I can't remember what it was now, but that was great, really, because there was me on the organising in all the meetings before the event. And I was mixing with all the lords and what have you, and it was tremendous. I suppose that yes, that was a great event, and it was very sad. They were very keen to make that the the car event of the north of England, as opposed to Goodwood in the south. And it was, but anyway, it didn't. Because we then took it to Liverpool as well. We had a event at Liverpool on the docks there before one of the events, just to promote it. The weekend before, we had the cars on the boats in the dock and everything. And that again was pretty demanding. It was not because we had to organise that. But no, I guess that powerboat racing occupied a lot of my time and a lot of my money and a lot of
that is the thing. Time and money. Time especially, because I know, because I've been on management at the club, I've done training boat with the club and various other bits and pieces and things, and it is, and you know, the phone's always ringing. There's always something to do. There's always people to speak to. There's always places to go. There's always places to organise, people to organise. And then to make it all happen and to make it gel together on the day is a logistical nightmare. But somehow, obviously, you managed it. And in, you know, for the bits that I've done, I managed to do what I done. But, you know, did you get the rewards that you wanted out of it all?
And
I don't mean financial rewards, because we all know that there's no money.
no, quite. That's why I hesitated. That's why I hesitated. Yes,
but I mean, personally, do you think you sort of got a satisfaction, I suppose?
Yes,
for
I think.
word.
I mean, I was Commodore for 2 years, and then I was the president of the club for 12 years, I think it was, from 88 up to 2000. And I sponsored Battle of Britain most years. I remember when I was Commodore one year, we actually had every Thursday night sponsored by somebody. We managed to get them. And of course, that was in the days when Colin Chapman flew down in his helicopter a couple of times, and Clive Chapman was racing as well. So we had a few attractive names that people wanted to come and see, and it did help a bit. And Tom Percival, of course, was tremendous, because Bob Spalding, I mean, when Neil came most weeks, I got to know Neil extremely well, and Tom was there some weeks. Bob Spalding came some weeks, and those, of course, were the big, the big draw, really. Derek Izzard, you mentioned him earlier. I mean, Derek was a terrific driver, and he always gave everything he'd got and he was very, very competitive. And Owen Smith's sons, I mean, they were pretty good as well. We had a lot of good hydro drivers there, didn't we? We had the world champion who got killed there, didn't he? No, which one was that?
Well, we had Mick Pentley there, and
Mick, yes,
yeah, and Wayne Rudder, of course. But before them, of course, we had Peter Bright and Doug Willey, of course, as well.
Yes, they were all. Yeah. But then, of course, Alton Broad was the club. I remember when I first had my Formula 4, I used to go down to South Ockenden, and of course South Ockenden, when I met all my old friends down there, and of course Roy Clark was great in that he helped me at Cholmondeley, he helped me in all the big events that I had, and Nina and George Sawyer were stalwarts at Cholmondeley and always around the circuit. So I hope that they're still well, and I hope that. But I always remember at home here at South Ockenden that I was the kingpin there, because they all had monohulls and what have you, and my Formula 4 raced around the outside, the scratch man. I thought, my goodness, this is really... But then it was only like a puddle, but it was a lovely little club and a lovely... but it probably wouldn't fall into the RYA rules nowadays for safety. I don't suppose it would be another one that Ruth and Jenny Jelf would be looking at and thinking that's a bit too shallow, or it's a bit too steep sides, or it's a bit too, but they were cavalier days, really, weren't they? And the racing in those days was great fun, and everybody involved in it was great fun. And I suppose it's very sad, actually, that it has fallen by the wayside now. I guess it was really the big change came after the millennium, when the exhaust could not be pumped into the water anymore. That was really the key issue, wasn't it? When the engines needed to be redesigned. So all the older boats had to be chucked to one side almost, which was a bit sad. But,
yeah, because as you say, moving on, it kind of, everyone having to update equipment, and because, sometimes times can be a little bit difficult. 2008, of course, when we had the credit crunch. So, did we really recover from that? Possibly not. And then, of course, not only are you struggling with a recession, you're also struggling to keep up with safety requirements, which you touched on, and of course engines, which are now not all 4-strokes, but we're kind of going that way. F4 is now a 4-stroke engine. Formula 2 it's not a 4-stroke, but it's a green engine now, and they're costing a lot of money these days, and so are the boats.
Yes.
And of course, every time the engines change, the boats change.
Yes, absolutely. So you can't, in our day, I guess, all the second-hand boats would get passed on down the line, and you'd all have a chance to have more people coming into the sport. I remember when we promoted the Formula 2, and there was an awful lot of boats that were around, and they just needed a little financial assistance to get them back on the water again, and that's what made the circuit, really, because that's how we ended up with 24 boats. And it was but anyway, you look back and you enjoyed it all, and it's been extremely exciting and extremely great fun, and we met a lot of nice people, and I hope they're all enjoying themselves. I hope they're all still fit and well, and I guess that like me, I just look forward to every day out working and all over the country, and I just enjoy what I do. And I'm very lucky in that I now have a very nice partner who looks after me, Hilda Harvey, and new lease on life.
Yeah, we have to say that Hilda Harvey is your partner, because you've not had a name change, because it's the name at the bottom of your screen there. but it's nice to see you again, Robin. And of course we did meet 2018 when we had the European OSY 400 Championships, and you got an invite to come and do a bit. And I guess really that was the last bit of powerboat racing stuff that you've done. But again, you know, to me, it was good to hear your voice over the speakers again. It was like you'd never left, and the voice still, and even now today, the voice still sounds the same. It all, you know, when we were talking last week, the voice all, you know, you're still fired up. You still got the enthusiasm there.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
You know, and would you ever kind of consider a comeback or a one-off comeback, or, you know, if you thought the time was right? Or
I suppose we had a drive around Bristol and looked around there. And of course, Bristol is now completely out of the question, because it's all jetties and sports boats moored there and that sort of thing. And now it goes, I guess it wouldn't qualify safety-wise. I guess that, and the problem really, I think, is finding the right circuit to get the big crowd to watch. I think if you could do that, unfortunately, all the clubs that we raced at didn't really, they didn't pull the big crowds. That was the problem. And I think if they had just done that, when I look back on Stockton, particularly Stockton and Southport, Victoria Dock, other than Bristol, those were the ones that stick out in my mind as being, I mean, we were lucky at Southport because we had a tremendous crowd of holidaymakers, and I mean, they were packed all the way around the circuit, and it was a great circuit. They could see all the way around. It wasn't too big. They could see the boats being launched and everything, and that was, and again, Rother Valley was the same. We had a big crowd at Rother Valley, not as big as Stockton. I mean, the fateful day when the thunderstorm came, that was the Stockton, of course, was a sad memory for me, really, because the boats were standing on the start line for the Grand Prix on the Sunday afternoon when Paul Noon's wife pulled him off the start pontoon. That was when Andy Chesman had just been killed abroad, her father. And Andy, I knew him very well at Bodymore, and we worked together on 2 or 3 things, and he was a great fellow as well for the sport. So when you look back on it, Mike Taylor was another one who did a lot for the sport. Roy Clark, I've mentioned. Nina and George Sawyer. You can look at all the names that have. Bob Brister, of course, was. Bob only really commentated at Bristol and Alton Broad, I think. I don't remember him going to any of the other circuits, but he was an excellent commentator and very precise. And I was very lucky, actually, because, as the BBC producer said to me, you have just the right pitch voice for a commentator. It's sharp and fairly high pitched, good command of the English language, no bad language, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And but I missed out on that one. Otherwise, you'd have been listening to me every week, all
Wow.
over the world on Formula One. But but there you go. There you look back, and everybody, and I guess that life has been very exciting all the way, and it is still very exciting, and it will be very exciting until I depart. And I should look forward to coming to Alton Broad again when there's another. Yeah. If I get invited, I would be there with pleasure.
Well, I know we've got to hope. I mean, you know, the situation in the world at the moment, we still don't know if we're going to get a season in this year or not. We're hoping that we will. If it happens, it will be in June, the start of the year. But having said that, we've got a World Championship that is booked for July for GT15 and also for OSY 400. But it's all ifs and buts because of the travel situation and the pandemic. So we don't really know. We can guess all day long, but we don't really know if it's going to happen. But it would be good. I'm sure when it does happen, I'm pretty sure that you will get an invite to come back and do some more. And on this point, I really should, because I know you've been busy at work, and you know, when you said that you're still working and that, so you know, you're still thriving to do something, and you know that, and that's really good to see. So you know, I know you've had a busy day, but I do appreciate you coming on, because I know we had a technical problem last week. We had a bit of software problem earlier on, but it is grateful. And you know, from me to you, I thank you for all that you've done for me, because I wouldn't be talking, well, probably wouldn't even be doing this if it wasn't for you. So I owe you a lot in that respect.
I must say that I'm sorry you told me to sit back from the screen a bit, but of course the one thing I am is a bit hard of hearing now, so I had to listen to, in order to listen to you, I had to get up a bit close. But no, thank you very much for inviting me on, Jason, and I wish you well in the future, and I wish everybody well in the sport, and any time that I can do to help them, I will be pleased to do that. And I thank everybody who participated with me on all the events, because the events were only as good as everybody who got involved. And whoever's watching tonight, great stuff. Keep up the good work. And thanks for your involvement in the past. And thank you for inviting me on tonight.
Okay, Robin. Well, thanks very much indeed. And we'll see you all again next week, viewers. And take care, everybody. And Robin, thank you once again. Thank you. Good night.